Welcome to Blue Talks.
Thank you, Susan, for that introduction. So today, what we're talking about is how to envision your authentic life and live it. And I'm going to jump into the topic today with a show of hands from the audience with a couple of questions. How many of you here today in your life have felt either like a fraud, feel like you can't speak your truth, or feel like you didn't or don't belong here on the planet? How many, can I see all together? Oh, there's a nod, but not a hand. So it looks like there's about 100% of people in this room that have felt that way. So I'm going to be upfront today. You may not like me by the end of this because what I'm going to say is going to sound terrible or terribly terrific. The world that you were born into is not the same. You've changed and it's changed. We were born in a really interesting cultural era. We were sandwiched between the industrial age and the information age, which affects our healthcare system in a very unique way. It has us approach it very mechanically, as if we are items on a conveyor belt with broken parts. And many of you in the audience are really fed up with going to healthcare providers when nothing works or lasts. Or you're a healthcare provider yourself, and you're tired of people coming to you to be cured or fixed when you know they're not broken. So what I'm telling you today and inviting you into knowing is that we're moving into a spiritual age where you are no longer going to feel like you need to fit in like a cog in a system, but you will embody the fact that you're not a limited being made up of the sum of your parts, where you have the choice of your own free will to leave the life you're living and move to the one that's in alignment with your soul, where you will no longer feel satisfied with a mediocre body with random symptoms or injuries, a platonic or toxic relationship, or a half-assed career. Now, this isn't going to feel comfortable because what that means is that you will have to become part of the minority that no longer feel like a fraud or belong to those that do. What that means then is that your mission has to become stronger than your fear or your desire for comfort. But that you will find a new level of comfort that comes from living your life authentically. So what I'm going to teach you today, by the end of today, you're going to know how to speak directly to your soul so that you can envision your authentic life and know why the mental, emotional, and spiritual symptoms are showing up in your life today. Does that sound like a good plan? You're interested in knowing? Yeah? Okay. So before I go into that, I'm going to tell you a little story about me so that you know how it is that I've come to know this stuff. So when from the age of about 14 to my early 20s, I lived in a neighborhood that looks like this. It was full of acreages, fancy cars, and indoor pools and all of those things. Christmases, we had tons of wrapped presents and my stockings were always full and overflowing, and my mom really put a lot of effort into it. But I had this distinct feeling all my life that something really important was missing. And at the age of 16, this is where I lived. This is a Google map. So my house is in the middle, and we had a neighbor that lived off to the right of us. And he was a lucrative plastic surgeon. So one day we trekked across the grass there to have conversation on his balcony. And this is me when I was 16. He had a good assessment of how I looked. And he informed me that he could fix the dimple on my nose. This one, right here. I don't know if you can see it. I'll give you a close up. Do you see it? See the flaw there that should be surgically helped? Anybody? Help me out here. Do you see it? No? Well, neither did I. So I was actually quite disgusted disgusted by his suggestion. And the awkward silence that followed, and the weird feeling that he had this desperate need for approval set in. What happened the next day was shocking, but not surprising. Because I felt his desperation, his suicide made sense to me. And I couldn't have explained it when I was 16 years old. But the energetic impression of his desperate last days were stamped into my being. I can still feel it. I knew it, and I felt it in my body. Now, a lot of us have these energetic stamps. We call them trauma these days. It reminds me of a quote from Bob Marley. He says that some people are so poor, all they have is money. And this reality, this rich culture, was my reality until I lived and moved and worked in India in 1995. So there's me with my little bowl cut and my Indian family. They were, that's gonna make me cry too. They were unbelievably poor and outrageously generous. They gave up their only double bed for me. And while I was in India, I witnessed families, parents that would break their children's legs so that they could make more money begging.
These injustices,
they ate away at me like termites in a well-constructed home. No one could see it, but it was happening. So on the 24-hour flight home from India back to Canada, my chronic lifelong eczema flared up. I remember it was so itchy. I was scratching this, I can still remember, this elbow fold vigorously. It was so itchy. And I scratched it so much to the point of bleeding. And within a day or two, a streptococcal boil the size of a golf ball erupted. Eventually, I was led to the infectious disease specialist who told me that it was caused by a streptococcal blood infection. And I kept getting many more of them. And they told me I would just have to take antibiotics for the rest of my life. I was absolutely dumbfounded, actually, that they couldn't help me. Now, at that time, culture shock set in, and I really spent a lot of time by myself and within my inner being. And the awareness of the energetic stamps of this life and my past lives started to rise up, and so did an intuitive wisdom from a well deep within me. And a really magical thing happened. I came across a book, just some random book, and I opened up to the page in a sentence that just leapt off the page in front of me. Then the character described his anger as this festering boil that erupted through the surface, and it set off this aha, this inner resonant truth that I could feel in my body. I stopped taking the antibiotics. And I haven't had a boil since. I also had my lifelong eczema disappear. So it's interesting, isn't it? I felt different in my life. And when I was 16, at the time, I couldn't have known the backstory of my neighbor's life. But I learned 30 years later that he'd always carried a gun in his car, and that he had been fired from his lucrative career as a plastic surgeon from stealing narcotics from the hospital that he worked in. It was soon after that he took his own life. So it's crazy, isn't it? It's absolutely crazy. The things that we can feel, that we're ashamed or afraid to talk about, but that we can feel. So I'm here to tell you today that we're entering into a spiritual age. A spiritual age that is an invitation to the energetic realm, the one that you can't see, but that you can feel, sense, and imagine. So I was given a lot of opportunity to enter the energetic realm and to know what it was. In my life from 9 to 12, I started wearing glasses. I had chronic, horrible migraines, and the eczema I told you about, it covered my body all over. Now at the age of 24, I had a streptococcal blood infection that disappeared. And my eczema disappeared, as you knew. At the same time, when I was 24, I got my first reduced prescription and improved my eyesight. Along the way, I also learned how to eradicate my chronic migraines in an instant. I had chronic back pain. I had pre-cervical cancer that turned to a diagnosis of normal overnight. I also had hypothyroid and an autoimmune condition that I don't have any symptoms of despite not taking medications. And I also had an impacted tooth that required surgery that did the same thing. So at the age of 52, I am the healthiest mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and relationally than I've ever been in my life. And it's all, just so we have the record here, I do not take any pharmaceutical medications at all, ever since taking antibiotics, and they didn't work so well for me. So it's a spiritual age that we're entering into. And what that means is that we're leaving what I call the fight, force, or fix paradigm. It's much like diets that don't work. Why cancer patients go into remission only to relapse, and why we keep going back for massage for repetitive injuries. It's the self-harm in the process of what we're doing. Often we seek out ways to alleviate our pain or discomfort, but self-healing is not about feeling good. Masking symptoms are all the temporary fixes. It's about truth. And that's a bitter pill for most people to swallow. So that's what I do. I help people swallow their bitter pills. I help people with chronic and complex conditions when nothing else works. I tend to be the last stop along the way from people seeing their symptoms as something to fix, to signs leading them on their authentic, soul-driven path. Like Rose, for example, who was a client of mine who suffered for over 20 years with uveitis, which was an autoimmune condition that affects the eyes. And her ophthalmologist said it was the absolute worst case he'd ever seen. So she would take drops when she had her flare-ups that would last 2 to 3 weeks at a time to try to soothe the symptoms. Now, her inner resonant truth was related to an absolute ingrained anger and contempt that she had towards a family member for over 20 years. Once her inner resonant truth settled in, she woke up the next morning with no symptoms. She says to me, that was just the miracle. I can't believe it's that simple. And there's definitely something to this process. And then there was Lee. Lee had HPA axis, which was fourth stage adrenal fatigue. And she had been trying hard to get better using various methods for about 5 years, where she'd been in chronic pain and fatigue. And then she found me. And after my 90-day program, she said she felt 90% better. Her inner resonant truth was related to her belief in perfectionism and a deep-held grief that she had of her mother passing. Afterwards, she was able to connect spiritually to her mother. I just spoke to her last week, actually, on my trip to BC, and she's doing amazing. She is now energetic, healthy, climbing mountains. She used to be a professional athlete, by the way, with her daughters. She's got some teenage daughters. And so she says, thank you for helping people, including myself, go through all the murkiness and self-judgment of illness. Much love, Lee. So what these examples tell us is that the body is a conduit of truth. And it belongs to an energetic relay system. The energy of life itself is directed through our body. And we have to take what the soul imparts to us and apply it to our lives. And the way that we do that is that we have to be able to speak to, hear, and understand our soul, right? This is what I said I would teach you today. Unfortunately, we can't pick up the phone and say, hey, soul, what is it that you're trying to say? It's so important when you speak to someone that you speak the language that they speak. So if you have a friend that speaks German, you're not going to speak English and expect a response, right? You need a translator. And so when it comes to the soul, you can't speak German or English because it doesn't speak any verbal languages at all. It speaks energetic. And that's because verbal languages reflect the cultural era that we're living in. And you remember what those were, right? The industrial age and the information age. So Jean Achterberg, who wrote Shamanism in Modern Medicine, says that soul language is pre-verbal and a priori. And what that means is it's pre-verbal in the sense that it probably evolved a lot earlier than language, and that it uses different neural pathways for the transmission of information. It's also a priori because it's a language we've always had since we were born. And it speaks to the deep interconnection and purpose of mankind. The soul's language is also universal, timeless. It's timeless in the sense that you can always access your energetic stamps from this and past life, and energetic because it speaks to you through feeling and emotion. So what I'm here to tell you is that the energetic relay system is always transforming energy from the physical, the emotional, spiritual, and the physical and back. And what Einstein says about this is that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. But so many of us are so busy trying to destroy or create energy. Different kinds of energy, like uncomfortable emotions or physical sensations. And what that does is it inadvertently short circuits our energetic relay system. But if you are truly open to the energy in whatever way that it presents itself to you, it will give you a life-giving insight. But the truth is, many of us really don't know how to be an open conduit to source. So I'm going to give you a hint right now. If the next time you find yourself in a really difficult circumstance or have a symptom, ask your soul through intention to allow that energy to become something that you can understand. An image, a memory, a sound, a different kind of energy. And it will do it for you if you are earnestly open about it. The soul does want to speak to you. And it's very persistent, so it'll escalate the symptoms until you're in a full-blown health or life crisis if you're misinterpreting the messages that you're receiving. So many of us, once we find ourselves in these kinds of situations, are hopeful that someone else will give us the answers in a book, an herb, a pill, or a treatment of some form. Or we do meditation, get to affirmations, or positive thinking. But the truth is, you will need to face your fears and master your soul language eventually. We are heading into the spiritual age of energetic mastery. And that is why I created my Soul Truth Discovery Academy, so that you can learn your soul language and live the authentic life you were meant to live. So I have a few questions for you before we leave today. If you continue to speak to your soul in the same manner that you do, I'm curious, maybe some of you don't at all, how will it affect your life? How will it affect your body symptoms? How will it affect your work, your relationships, and the rest of your life if you continue to speak to your soul the same way? If this question elicits some uncomfortable emotions in your being, in your body, I want you to know that it's a sign leading to your soul path. Finally, I'm going to ask you another question, and that is, are you sick and tired of trying to fix, force, or fight others? Are you interested in learning and turning your symptoms into signs? And do you think it would be amazing not to have to wait for hours on end in a doctor's office or months in counseling, and you would like to connect to Source directly? If that's true, then it's another sign to follow your intuition, to learn and master your soul language so that not only can you envision your authentic life, but that you can live it.